It was the sound of laughter that first drew their attention. Not the warm, joyful kind that fills a room with light, but the cold, snickering sort that makes the air feel thin and the heart feel heavy. And at the center of it all, in a booth at the back of the crowded, steamy diner, was an old man named Walter. He sat perfectly still, his hands resting on the chipped formica table, as if by not moving he could become invisible. But his coat made that impossible. It was an old, heavy wool overcoat, several sizes too large, worn thin at the elbows and cuffs, and patched in places with fabric that didn't quite match. To the group of teenagers at the next table, it was the funniest thing they'd seen all day. This was Walter's routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he would take the same bus, sit in the same booth at Mel's Diner, order the same bowl of soup and a glass of water, and read yesterday's newspaper he'd found on the bus seat. He spoke to almost no one. The world had slowly become a quieter, lonelier place for him over the years, and he had learned to move through it as a quiet, lonely figure. The staff at Mel's knew him, but only as a kind, distant ghost who always left a single, carefully polished coin as a tip. They'd long since stopped trying to make conversation. On this particular Thursday, the laughter was sharper. A boy with a bright blue jacket nudged his friend. "Check it out," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "I think that coat fought in the war and lost." A girl giggled, hiding her smile behind her phone, which she subtly angled to take a picture. Walter heard every word. A faint flush crept up his neck, but he didn't look up. He simply smoothed a wrinkled corner of his newspaper with a trembling hand, his fingers brushing against the thick fabric of his coat where it lay bundled on the seat beside him. That coat was his sanctuary, his shield against the chill of the world, both outside and in. He pulled it a little closer. From behind the counter, a young waitress named Maya watched it all unfold. She was new, only a few months into the job, and still believed in the goodness of the diner's worn-out booths and coffee-stained menus. She felt a knot form in her stomach as she saw Walter's shoulders hunch just a little more. Without overthinking, she picked up a fresh pot of coffee and walked over, deliberately placing herself between Walter and the teenager's table. "More coffee, sir?" she asked, her voice deliberately warm and normal, as if no unkind sound had ever existed in the room. Walter looked up, surprised. His eyes, a pale, watery blue, held a lifetime of stories she couldn't begin to read. "No, thank you, dear," he said, his voice a soft rasp. "The soup is plenty." Maya nodded, but she didn't move away. She turned slightly and gave the table of the teenagers a look. It wasn't angry or confrontational, it was just a look, steady and disappointed. The laughter died down to uneasy shuffles. One of them mumbled, "We were just joking." But the damage, the old familiar ache of humiliation, was already sitting in Walter's chest. He finished his soup slowly, each spoonful a quiet act of dignity. When he was done, he reached for his coat. As he stood to put it on, a worn, yellowed envelope, thick with folded pages, slipped from the deep inner pocket and fluttered to the linoleum floor. It landed face up. The teenagers saw. One of them, the boy in the blue jacket, let out a low whistle. "Whoa, someone's got a love letter. Bet it's like from the 1800s. This was too much. A deep, quiet anger, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself in years, stirred in Walter. It wasn't for himself anymore. It was for the letter. He bent down, his bones protesting, and picked it up with a tenderness that was utterly at odds with the harsh scene. He held it carefully, as if it were a living thing. Then he did something he had never done. He turned to face them, not just the teenagers, but the whole diner, which had fallen into a watching silence. His voice, when it came, was clear and strong, cutting through the quiet. "You laugh at this coat," he said, not with bitterness, but with a profound, weary sadness. "You laugh at me. That's fine. I've heard it before." He held up the envelope. "But you will not laugh at this." He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He simply held it against the tattered wool over his heart. "This coat," he began, "was my father's. He was a carpenter.
He wore it every day to work, in rain and snow, to build homes for other families. These patches, he pointed to a neat square patch on the elbow. My mother sewed this one the winter I had the fever, sitting by my bedside. She said mending his coat while she watched me made her feel useful. The diner was utterly silent now. The fry cook had turned off the sizzling grill. Maya stood frozen, the coffee pot still in her hand. Walter's finger moved to a longer, rougher stitch along the seam. This one I sewed myself, the day I got my first job at the printing press. I was so proud, I wanted to fix something of his, to make it part of my story, too. He took a slow breath, his gaze drifting to the letter in his hands. And this letter is why I wear it. It's the last thing my son, David, ever sent to me. He was a medic. He was stationed very far from here. A single, silent tear traced a path down the deep lines of his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. In his last letter, he wrote about the cold. He said the wind there had a bite to it like nothing he'd ever felt. He joked, "I wish I had Grandpa's old coat, the one that weighs a ton. I bet even the wind couldn't get through." Walter's voice cracked just once. He never came home. This coat came back to me, and his letter, I keep it here, close to me. So when I wear it, it's not just me walking around. It's my father's hard work, my mother's care, my son's memory. It's my family. You see an old coat. I see everything I ever loved. The boy in the blue jacket was staring at the floor, his face flushed with shame deeper than any anger could have produced. The girl who had giggled was crying openly, quietly. The weight of their mockery hung in the air, heavy and ugly, transformed by the profound beauty of what they had been mocking. Walter slowly, carefully placed the letter back into the deep pocket, right over his heart. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to Maya, a silent thank you for her small act of standing in the way. Then he turned and walked toward the door, the old coat swaying gently around his legs. No one laughed, no one whispered. The only sound was the soft ting of the bell above the door as he left. For a long moment, no one in the diner moved. Then the boy in the blue jacket stood up. He walked to the counter where Maya still stood. His friends watched, unsure. He pulled some money from his pocket, much more than the cost of their meals. For his lunch, he said quietly, his voice thick, and for ours. It wasn't about the money, it was an offering, the only form of apology he could manage. Maya simply nodded, accepting it. When Walter returned on Tuesday, she greeted him with his usual soup, but when he went to pay, she shook her head. "It's been taken care of," she said softly. He looked puzzled, then glanced at the now empty booth where the teenagers had sat. Understanding dawned in his eyes. He didn't say anything, just gave that same small nod. He sat in his booth, and for the first time, he didn't open yesterday's newspaper. He just sat, looking out the window, one hand resting lightly on the pocket over his heart. And at the counter, the boy in the blue jacket, who had come back alone, sipped a Coke and finally understood that every person is a walking story, and the most important chapters are often sewn into the seams of what we carelessly dismiss. The world is full of invisible histories, worn quietly by strangers we pass every day. A thoroughbred coat might just be a tapestry of love. A faded letter in a deep pocket isn't just paper, it's a heartbeat. And sometimes it takes the cruelty of a laugh to teach us the profound, humbling language of listening.